as I have been introduced, I'm Sarah Marshall. I am the social media editor at the Wall Street Journal. There are several social media editors. I'm the person in the thing that America calls a mayor. So there's also one in Asia, and there's also 3 people in the US doing a similar role. So I thought what I'd do is just kind of give you a brief overview of how we work at the Journal in terms of the social news team and how I see our role, because I thought that would be quite useful for you. And then a few tips on kind of how I see connecting with influencers. I'm kind of talking with my journal hat on, my Wall Street Journal hat on, but also having been a reporter for a number of years and dealing with communications people, PR people. It's been really, really kind of impressive and encouraging seeing the talks here tonight and seeing that we're playing the long game. So some of my tips, or rather pleas to PRs, might actually not be terribly relevant if we're actually talking about something a little bit more meaningful than kind of short-term relationships. So this is how we work at the Wall Street Journal. I see, as a social media editor, as a social person, a social news person, having 4 roles. Engagement, driving traffic, branding, and news gathering. So that's my role of what I'm doing for the Wall Street Journal. I'm going to take those in the reverse order. I put them in that order because that's kind of the order I kind of think that I spend my time doing those things, but I thought I'd do it the other way around. So news gathering. So of course, a lot of people are breaking news on Twitter. This is Poroshenko in Ukraine, announcing there something like, this is a Ukrainian flag we're putting on a building in Sloviansk. And then the top line of our story is, we're putting on the eastern town of Sloviansk, put up a flag, and this kind of became a story. So of course, keeping an eye on Twitter, using Twitter in a really smart way to get the news first. Similarly, Facebook is actually incredible. You're probably aware how much news is now sourced from Facebook, Medvedev, and now making announcements for all things Russia via Facebook rather than via PR people or communications people or himself on other channels. Even Instagram. This is the mayor of Kharkiv, Geraty Kearns, who was shot earlier this year. It looked like he wouldn't survive. At that time, I think when he was shot, he had about 70,000 or so followers on Instagram. He was this runner and cyclist, and then he was kind of charting his recovery. He actually did survive, and you can see him here with his Russian wife, and charting his recovery through Instagram. So of course, that's not going to necessarily make a front page story or a big story for the Wall Street Journal, but at the same time, just that kind of influencer of understanding where people are by following them on social is, of course, something all of our journalists do. The second point that's kind of important is, and I spend some of my day doing, is driving traffic to the journal. So putting things on Twitter, we've got 5 million followers. Putting things on Facebook, we've got 3.3 million followers. So that's what I spend some of my day, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. specifically, doing to the Wall Street Journal community of readers. This I pulled out. This was a chart that came out this week of a report. Parsley is an analytics platform used by a lot of news sites, and they've kind of amalgamated a lot of their results from news sites. And this is just to kind of demonstrate the importance of social. The fact that there's a 7 percentage point increase in the last year from news sites like us getting traffic from social. This excludes homepage traffic, and for us the homepage is still very important. But you can see search is decreasing. Actually, it's still increasing for us. But social, it's ever more kind of increasing. And the way I see social is it's the way to get new readers. So it's really important. And particularly for me, who we're 80% read by people in the US. So what part of my job is kind of getting a new audience in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And social is obviously that kind of great tool you have to grow new audiences, introduce them to the brand. Eventually, they further down the line, they become kind of homepage readers or come back more frequently. And then the engagement. This is the thing that I think is the most interesting about social, because it's the stuff that I think a couple of years ago my editors probably would have said it's a bit fluffy, it's a bit kind of, oh, let's talk to people. But actually, I wrote a blog post about it yesterday, which probably, if I'm honest, more for internally to kind of get a message out to people at the journal that actually this is the most important thing. Let's focus on this and not just let's drive lots of traffic and let's drive, lots of, get hits to news stories. The engagement stuff is every time somebody engages with our brand, in my mind, they increase our likelihood of coming back again and again. So this engagement thing is kind of really interesting. Anybody know who this guy is? He might have been on the news this week. Okay, he doesn't look like Einstein, but he's the guy who's been leading the Rosetta mission. He's the scientist. And this is his tattoo. He made some deal that he was going to get the Rosetta tattoo tattooed on his thigh. If I can't actually remember the full backstory, but he's this great guy and wants to inspire the next generation. So this week, there was your clue. So this week we got him to do a Q&A for us on Facebook. So introducing, we could have done it with our science correspondent who knew a lot about this stuff, to be honest. But he was really keen to do this, and we do these Q&As, so people take over the Wall Street Journal page on Facebook, and you can even see the reach here of 250,000 people. So people just dive in for he just did it for half an hour because he was very limited on time on Tuesday. But people were asking him lots of questions, of course about the science, but obviously about his tattoos as well. That's something that we do increasingly on a daily basis, talking to people who were formerly known as the audience. Another one, you probably recognize this chap. This is one that we have a speakeasy blog, which is like an entertainment site, which tries to be less kind of celebrity, but a bit more meaningful. And again, Daniel Radcliffe did a Q&A for us. We do them a lot with our own journalists as well, make it very current. This is one we did today. And my colleague Sam Dagger, who's our Syria correspondent, I'm very proud to work at one of the few news organizations that has a full-time reporter in Syria. He'd been to the northeast of the country, a region that not many journalists have been to recently, and had been speaking to Kurdish fighters there in their fight against ISIS. And so he just jumped onto Twitter, and we simply did this Ask WSJ Sam Q&A earlier. In my mind, this helps people interact with us as the Wall Street Journal. It helps Sam get a larger following so that when he does a big story, people kind of come back to him, and he's kind of known as this person, this expert on Syria. We do Twitter AMAs. We've got one on Monday. We're publishing a story tomorrow on this stretch of water, which is the last hop for lots of refugees between Turkey and Greece. We're publishing that story tomorrow. We've got an AMA on Reddit on Monday with the reporter. So we do these, if any of you are not familiar with AMA, particularly if you're representing brands and everything, I think I'm right in saying that Reddit have a policy that they don't refuse anybody on an AMA. So you kind of pitch, you say, like, I've got this person. Obama did one this week. It's the great and the good and the small and the, So Paul here did one. Paul Sonnet did one on around the Crimean referendum. We'd probably do them not that often, probably once every couple of months. But they're really good ways for me of kind of getting our influential voice to new readers. So going to the Reddit community is really smart. It's really insightful. We've done them around the Egypt elections. We've done them around Crimea. We've done them around the Turkey Twitter ban. So, once the stories happen, we've put our journalists on Reddit and done a bit of a Q&A. So again, very useful. They last about an hour. And we do Google Plus Hangouts sometimes. This is my colleague Rory. So I'm just going to share with you a few kind of tips or things that I use potentially as a journalist that you probably want to flip on their head, and just kind of talk about a few of the things that I think are most useful in terms of searching out influencers. So Twitter lists, it's kind of, a classic, but they're still incredibly useful. I sit next to somebody who is from an organization called Storyful. If you've not heard of Storyful, they're actually owned by News Corp, who own the Wall Street Journal. Now they bought them out last year. And what Storyful do is they're really good at getting news that's kind of breaking on Twitter. So they've set up all these smart technologies which do things like monitor Twitter lists. And as soon as a list gets busier in what people are talking about or mention particular keywords, then they kind of break the news. And their clients include Reuters. So they're kind of, they're putting news on the news wires. They're beating the wires, essentially, because social's so quick these days. So just as an example, here's a list of our journalists. We try and keep it up to date, but it's probably not all of them. You can see that we've got quite a few, probably a range of people subscribing to that list. I was interested to meet Adam Parker again here, who has a great service in terms of curating lists and automatically producing lists, so bear that in mind, find him afterwards. So Twitter lists, really useful to go and find groups of people at organizations, or as a journalist, I quite, when something happens, I'll find somebody else's list and just basically use that as my source of potential interesting influences on a story. Second thing that I use, actually I used it today because I wanted to find, I don't think what I was looking for today, but here I've used the example. Follower Wonk is this tool where you can search Twitter bios. So if you're looking for an influential person or looking for an influencer, I use the example of a commodities reporter. I actually used it earlier today, but I can't quite remember what I was using it for. I use it probably like once a week just to find somebody. I know what it was. We've got this big story on refugees coming out tomorrow. I wanted to find out the people who were influential on Twitter around refugees, so UNHCR, people like that, and just check we hadn't missed anyone if we're going to try and get some social love for this story. This tool, has anybody heard of this tool, BuzzSumo? Yeah. Okay, lots of you. Okay, I don't need a little introduction. It's good, isn't it? I only came across it about 6 months ago, and I was like, this is amazing. I love it. And so from your point of view, you can search for influencers. So here, cycling, find out who's influential about cycling. From my point of view, and probably from your point of view as well, you can do things here. I've got the paid version. It's actually free. I don't pay for it, but they've given me a paid version. You can search, so that's influencers. So, but I can do things like a journalist search, so search for an author and look at what their most social stories are of the past day, of the past week, of the past month, or whatever. And you can actually see who's tweeted those stories, and this new feature they introduced this week about backlinks, which is the links going back to previous stories, which is really, really good. So I'd encourage you, if you've not checked it out, it's a good tool. And then tips, which is, I'm saying tips, but they're really please. And like I say, I think we've all kind of moved on from the this is a press release type of journalism pitch that I was certainly familiar with as a reporter. But just a few pleas from me, and maybe they're probably things that people in this room may already be familiar with, but the things that, again and again, I kind of thought when I was dealing with PRs on a daily basis or a weekly basis, it's like, why don't people do this? It's so obvious. So put your name in the Twitter account that you manage, for example. This is really frustrating. About this time, about over Christmas last year, just before we were gearing up for Davos, and I knew Matt Damon was going to essentially talk about a water charity. I can't remember this is actually this one that he's involved in, but he's a co-founder of a water charity. But from a journal point of view, from a Wall Street Journal point of view, he was talking about microfinance and really interesting issues. And we thought, well, it'd be interesting to get him to do a chat with us or a Google Plus Hangout or something. And I was trying to find a contact for the charity. And of course, nobody puts details of who actually manages this account or any. And it was over the Christmas period, so it wasn't like I could just phone an office. So my plea to you is to put, if you're managing a brand, or then suggest to them that they put some kind of indicator in their Twitter bios or in their Facebook page profile that will help you track them down. Another thing that, again, I was a tech reporter before, and trying to, you're doing a launch, and you think, well, there's no photos of this thing, so there's no story. If I haven't got a photo of this new product, I haven't got a story. And I've always thought, why don't people just put on Flickr, under a Creative Commons license, make them available, just put a kind of batch of photos up of a product out there. And actually, it's funny, whenever I write about social media stuff, I use the same Twitter photos, I use the same Facebook photos again and again and again. The ones that are in this presentation, for example, they're the ones that are under a Creative Commons license. So if you're actually trying to get a bit of traction for a brand or whatever, making some useful photos available wouldn't be so bad, would be a good thing. Rosetta's done a great job at actually, as the Probe is sending these selfies back today, and they're actually, they're very quick and very good at getting these high-res pictures up. And it always surprises me how few companies do this for journalists. And as a journalist, you're quite often having to phone the press person and kind of going, oh, well, we can send it to you tomorrow. Well, I'm afraid in the digital world, tomorrow the story's dead by then. So, that's something that's frustrated me in the past. Plea number 3, and it picks up on what Adam was saying about, kind of it's like that indulging thing. I told you I wrote this blog post yesterday, which is kind of probably for my bosses, about why social is so key to making news a kind of a news product habit forming. And Chris Hamilton, who's a social media editor at the BBC, a compliment from him is quite nice, or a compliment from these people called Bold Rocket, who I've never heard of. That's kind of nice. So yeah, we all want to be indulged, let's face it. So mentioning journalists, connecting with them that way, finding them on social media, and having these kind of meaningful relationships that are about the long form. I think that's really smart from what you've heard tonight. Number 4, probably doesn't happen quite so much anymore, but the frustration of a PDF when you're sending a statement for someone, it's like you can't copy and paste this PDF very easily, because then you get all the HTML buggy stuff and you have to put it through something else. Plus you have to kind of like download something, and it's really frustrating. So please never send a PDF to a journalist. Keep an email short and sweet. And I'm not a reporter anymore. I'm not kind of dealing with press releases, but I just did a quick search for press release in my email a couple of days ago, and these are not all press releases, but I'm getting loads of press releases, none of which are relevant to me, quite frankly. You can see most of them I don't open. Most of them just go straight into the updates file, because let's face it, pretty much all news organizations now use Gmail, not some kind of Outlook system. So yeah, most press releases I find are not targeted in any way. Well, obviously the ones that I get are not targeted anyway, because I don't report anymore. So I think there's a lot of old school PR going on still that is probably not relevant to the audience here, but I thought always want to kind of, just flag up how many press releases a journalist who is not really a reporting journalist will get, and why I'm not going to read any of these, frankly. And having worked in radio, and needing a story on Christmas Day to report, and having worked for a small tech site, then you kind of like, it's very obvious, and probably you all know it, but nobody ever seems to respond to this from the kind of the PR world, where you kind of always need a story. You need stories for weekends, you need stories for Christmas, you need something pre-prepared for the radio for all these occasions. And I quite often kind of would tell my key contacts this kind of thing. Well, if you've got anything, why don't you just kind of give me a line on this, or make somebody available at this time? And quite frankly, very few people do. It is a real kind of close, everybody goes on holiday. So, and of course, it's an excuse to put a picture of a cat in the presentation. And then finally, it's not all about text-based stories anymore. Yeah, quite frankly, you know this. You don't really need us big journalists to get your big brand campaigns going. You kind of communicate with your audiences directly. But hey, I'm not necessarily saying that we'd accept a pitch like this at the Journal, but if you are the person managing the European Space Agency's coverage of this big launch, then I went out and reached out to them, because I thought this would be a really interesting thing to do. But quite frankly, I've never seen people kind of pitching, oh, well, this person would be available to do this for us. So, a Twitter chat, a Facebook Q&A, that kind of thing is what we're doing. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there as an idea. But I also want to leave on a note that kind of the Wall Street Journal, I think I was billed as going to give you all these secrets of how you can get your stories into the Wall Street Journal. Quite frankly, the Wall Street Journal, more than anywhere I've ever worked before, it's a tough sell, because it's this news organization with so many editors and so much to go through. We don't really do stuff from press releases. We do stuff from sourcing and things like that. But realistically, I think there's a lot in what Michael said, what other people have said on this long game. The things I've been invited to recently that I've not really realized that I was being influenced. I was invited to a breakfast at the Ivy with somebody who was working for a large video streaming service, which might have been something like Netflix, who was kind of coming over and moving to the UK, and they wanted to meet. It was just a breakfast for 10 people, and I was like, well, I've been invited to this, but I feel quite special. That indulging thing. And I'll go along to the Ivy on a Monday morning. That's more fun than doing anything else. And and the other people that were invited, it was like, these are really interesting people. I'm going to go and meet them. But actually, that was 21st century PR. I realize now, that was building relationships with key people. And it's not the only example that I've kind of come across. So I think it's these relationships that you can, even with journalists from the Wall Street Journal, I think it's that long game. I think influencing gently. I do think that that's a really positive move forward as we progress digitally. Thank you.